What you guys, let's fix a PC that keeps crashing. This is my brand new computer I built not long ago, and it keeps crashing when either I play games or when I'm rendering a video, or it just randomly crashes for no apparent reason. This is a Ryzen 7000 series. We also have DDR5 RAM. I don't have any spare motherboards or spare RAM to swap out here, so I'm going to have to use software. And also, we're going to have to troubleshoot in a different way here. The CPU has been undervolted because of the temperature issues. And also, we do have a 4070 Ti in this one, which is a pretty beefy card. And it does get very hot inside this case as well. Now, I have already tested the power supply, and the power supply is good. And also know the drives are working okay as well. But before we continue, let's have a quick word from today's video sponsor, CD Key Sales. If you're looking to get a cheap Windows 10 Pro or a cheap Windows 11 Pro OEM key, check out the links in the video description. You can use my promo code R09, apply this to your order. They will then send that to your account, and then you can head over to the activation center and activate your version of Windows. Anyway, back to the video. So here we have our PC here. So I've already tested the power supply. The power supply is good. I know the power supply is working. Everything is new here. So I know the power supply is good. I need to test this RAM. So that's what I'm going to start off with first. I've tried putting one stick in and tried all the same things. It happens again. And I've tried using the other stick in another bay, and it just does the same thing. So I know I can't do anything else because I don't have any spare RAM. So I'm going to need some software to test this and run an extensive test on this because this is DDR5. I don't want to go and buy more DDR5 RAM and it might not be the RAM at all. So I'm going to go ahead and check this. Now, I don't also have another motherboard available right now, and I don't have another CPU to hand for this particular socket. This is a 4070 Ti. I can easily check this. I can put this into another computer because that will fit in any computer. I've reinstalled Windows already, and again, that has also not helped because the problem still happens. So I know it's a hardware issue. I've also checked the power supply. I've checked the SSDs on this system, and everything is okay there. So I know it's going to be related to either the water cooler, the RAM, the CPU, the motherboard, or the GPU. And we're going to go ahead and try to do what I can do today to find out, or at least whittle it down to what I think it could be. So let's go ahead and get memtest on the go here. I'm going to download this and create a bootable USB flash drive here and boot to this, and then run an extensive test on our memory. Now, if you've got memory to hand and you can swap this memory out, that's probably the best way to go because it's the quickest way to do things. But like I've already said, I don't have any DDR5 memory to hand, and that means I'm going to have to use this method, which this could be very similar to a lot of other people that have got a computer and they don't have any other spare parts. If you're one of those people, then this video will be helpful, because if you don't have any spare parts, you can still use these methods to test your hardware. So let's go ahead and create our bootable USB flash drive with memtest on it. And again, you can choose whatever memory testing software you want to use. I'm going to be going with this one. It's a tried and trusted piece of software. That's now done. And what I'm going to do here now is exit this out and boot to this USB flash drive. So it's going to go through a bunch of checks here, and then basically what we can do is start to configure our software to check our RAM. So let's go ahead and select the config here, and you'll see here you can check the test selected, and you can also set this up to how you like. I'm going to be doing quite an extensive test here because I want to make sure the RAM is working correctly. So let's go ahead and do that. But you can just hit the start test here and it should be fine. But you'll see there's a bunch of tests that it goes through to make sure the RAM is working correctly. And this is quite an extensive test. You can see up to 13 tests it goes through. And we're going to do 4 passes on this, and it will do a hammer test at the very end of each test. So I'll let this run, and you have to be patient here. Now, if you're looking on the screen here, you can see pass 1 of 4. So it's going to do 4 complete passes, and they'll be doing 13 different tests on each pass. Now this will take a few hours to complete, and it depends on the type of hardware you've got on your PC as well. So we'll just let this run, and I'll come back and show you some of the tests. You can see we're on pass 2 now, and this has gone right the way through, and we're already 54 minutes into the test. And again, there's no errors right now, which is good because it means the memory is in good working order. I'm pretty sure if there was an issue with this memory after we get through 4 passes, which you can see on the screen right now, this would have detected some sort of error on that memory by going through a bunch of different sequences. It would have found an error on there. And again, you can see 3 hours and 10 minutes, and we come back all clear. So it's quite an extensive test, this one, and it has come back clear. And that means now I can safely say that I think the memory should be okay. Now, I'd much more prefer to swap the memory out with known good working memory. That way I could have done this very quickly, but I don't have any DDR5 memory to hand. So this is the next best thing. And hopefully we can now move on to the next thing. So I know the memory should be okay, and I can now put that aside and concentrate on some other hardware here and try to find out what else could be wrong with this computer. So let's go ahead. There was blue screens that I have connected here. In the system information tab, you'll see that the BIOS is outdated, and we do need to update this BIOS. This is a Ryzen 7 7700X, which we all know had some issues with the ASUS motherboards, and I do have an ASUS motherboard in here as well. So I'm going to be basically flashing the BIOS as well, just to make sure that it isn't anything to do with the BIOS. And what we're going to do here is also go through some of the crashes that has happened. Now, this does freeze up as well. We get some random freezing, and also you lose control of the mouse and keyboard and all sorts of stuff like that going on. And I've seen this happen before, and it can be related to memory, and it can be related to the CPU. It can be a lot of different things. And if these blue screen dump files are pretty vague, they will tell you roughly what they think it is, but then it'll also list a bunch of other stuff, what it could be. And you can do some more advanced testing here, but you can see we do have that memory management issue here, and we can also see we do have driver IRQ, also no less no equal, which is normally a driver related issue. But we've reinstalled Windows, and we know that this is not the case because it's still happening, and it would be very rare to happen after you've done a fresh install. Kernel security check exception on there as well, so we know there's an issue. Now it does say that this could be a software problem, but then also it will say this could possibly be a hardware issue, and they'll go ahead and list a bunch of hardware like memory, hard drive, and they'll list all these things up, so you really sort of go round in circles. So keep it simple, and basically just test each component and make sure that that component is functioning properly, and you'll find the culprit, or get close to finding the culprit. So here we have Expo on, which is our XMP on here. I'm going to disable this and run a bunch of checks as well to make sure it's nothing to do with the XMP settings or the bad profile that might be in there, because that can cause issues as well. So I'll turn this off and disable it, go back to the desktop, and I'll run a bunch of checks just to make sure that it's nothing to do with Expo on this setting. I've already gone ahead and checked all of this to save time, and it wasn't nothing to do with that. It was still happening. So I'm going to head over to the website here, and we're going to download the very latest BIOS from ASUS. And you can see this is a Rogstrix B650E iGaming Wi-Fi motherboard here. So once we go over to the driver and tools, we can see here we got the option to select our operating system, go to BIOS and firmware, and you can see there is a latest BIOS update here. Now we all know that ASUS had an issue with the voltage on their boards for the 7000 series processors, and again, as soon as I purchased this hardware, I straight away protected myself with the voltage until they brought the BIOSes out of beta, which has now been some time, and I've been a bit behind on flashing the BIOS, but there was a protection with the undervolting which I've done there, so there's no way that it would be a voltage issue that's killed that CPU if it's a CPU issue. So always protect yourself there and use the correct settings and you should be okay. So I've got a flash drive here. What I'm going to do is format this into FAT32 and I'm going to do exactly what ASUS tell me to do, which is basically use their auto renamer to rename the file. So we've got the actual file here, which is our latest BIOS. So I'm going to drag these over to a folder here and use the renaming tool to rename the file to whatever you like. You can do it manually, but why do it manually when there's a tool that will do it for you? So let's go ahead and click on it. And it should then open up a little prompt box here and rename the BIOS to the correct name. This is important because otherwise it won't flash the BIOS. It won't recognize the file. So let's just go ahead and run this. And you can see it's going to rename it to exactly what ASUS have said it needs to be. So I'm going to push enter here and let it do its thing. It's now done. There we go. And all we need to do now is drop that file onto our USB flash drive. It doesn't need to be a bootable USB flash drive. It just needs to be FAT32. And I'm just going to quickly drag that file over here. Just quickly get these set up here. And once this is done, we can boot back into our BIOS and start the BIOS flashing process. So here we have our flash drive. So I'm just going to copy this one over. We don't need the renaming tool over there as well. We just need the actual BIOS itself. Okay, that's now done. What we can do now is boot to our BIOS and we'll go ahead and flash our motherboard. So we're inside here. As you can see here, let me just go through here and show you. There is the BIOS utility here. So what we're going to do is you can see it's listed the files on that drive. It has actually recognized the file. You can see it there in the list. And you can see the version we've got right now is version 1224. And we're going to be using the latest version to flash the BIOS. So let's go ahead and quickly do this. Important notice, I'm going to say yes here. That's okay. And it will restart. Just don't touch the keyboard at any stage. Just let it go through and do its flashing process. So we're going to use Easy Flash here. So say yes here. And the PC will then reboot. So let's go ahead and do that. And you can see the new version is 1616. And we're on version 1224. So it's quite outdated. And we'll let that go. And it should now restart. And we should now get to the next screen, which is this one here. You can see it's now processing and basically getting prepared to flash our BIOS. Okay, that's now completed. We'll just let that update successfully. There we go. System will restart. So we can click OK here. It will restart and you will see a little black screen come up with some text saying BIOS is updating. Do not shut down or restart your system. Just leave it and let it do its thing. And this will prevent any sort of system boot failure. So we're just going to let that do its thing and then we can then see what's happened with the system. So there we go. We're now back to this splash screen here and we can now push F1 to enter the BIOS. There we go. And now we have our BIOS updated to the very latest version. And you can now make some changes to your system. All the settings that I had inside here will be reset. So they've all gone back to default settings. And this is exactly what you should be doing next. So I'm going to test the system at default settings. I'm not going to touch anything. I'm not going to put Expo on. I'm not going to do anything like that and see whether we get an issue with it. Spoiler alert, I did actually start the system up and then I did a render of a video and it crashed. And that's exactly what happened. So I'm having the same issue after flashing the BIOS and running at stock settings. And that means we now need to move on to the next test. Now, I have noticed inside the PC that it's getting quite hot inside. The temperatures are okay, but inside the actual computer, it was getting quite warm. And I'll show you that a little bit later on in the video. Now, one other thing I can test is the GPU because I can put this into another machine because it's going to be easier to test. There is a new connector on here. I've unplugged the actual cable, I've unscrewed it, and I need to get this out of the system. Now you can see it's got its own proprietary connector here, and I do have an extension on this. The power supply does have a cable already with it, but I don't have this on my other machine, so I will need to use an adapter. Now I'm hoping that the GPU hasn't somehow gone bad and it's causing issues, because I can't play games and I'm having other issues as well, which sort of points towards the GPU. But I'm confident in saying that I don't think it is the GPU, but you can never know until you test. So let's go ahead and we'll give this a thorough test and find out whether it's the problem with the GPU. So this is the cable that come with the actual graphics card when I purchased it, and I did overpay for this GPU because the prices were super high. Now I'm going to use Furmark here. Now, spoiler alert, again, I was playing some games and it was perfectly fine and it wasn't crashing. I'm going to run Furmark here just to show you and do a GPU test here to see whether there's any issues. Now I'll run this for about 15 minutes and I'll see if there's any sort of temperature issues or any artifacting or any other issues on the screen as I'm testing it. This is quite an aggressive test, so if you are thinking about running these sorts of tests on your system, there is a warning to say this is quite an aggressive test, so be careful. And I'm going to put some anti-aliasing on as well because I want to push the card a little bit, and I'm using the full resolution here, and we'll go ahead and use the GPU stress test. But first I'm going to put a little GPU alarm on here for about 85 Celsius, just so I know that if we reach above that, you should never walk away and leave this test running. Always keep an eye on the temperatures when you're running tests like this, because these tests are quite aggressive, and you don't want to be walking away from the computer and letting it go way above its temperature threshold, otherwise it will cause problems. So let's go ahead and click OK here, especially if we know there could be an issue with the GPU. When you click go, you'll see a caution here. It's a run at your own risk, and you should see like a big furry donut going round, and you'll start hearing your graphics card starting to whirl, and you'll hear your fans ramping up. And you can see here up the top, it will give you some information. I've got a widescreen here, so it's very hard to capture the whole screen. But down the bottom here, you should see a graph, and you can see the temperatures are not going above 72, 73 Celsius, which is perfectly fine. And I run this for 15 minutes, and I didn't have any issues whatsoever. It didn't go above 72 or 73. So I know the GPU is fine, and that's a good sign. Next is this water cooling system. I want to check the socket and the CPU, because there has been known issues with burning on the CPU socket with these sort of processors, and I want to make sure this hasn't got any sort of burning issues on the socket or the CPU whatsoever. So I'm going to remove the pump, and I'm going to remove also the cooler from here, because I think I'm going to test this with another cooler, which I'm going to just get an air CPU cooler. I don't have one to hand, so I will need to order one, and I can test the CPU under air to make sure it isn't the closed loop water cooled system that has failed. Maybe the pump's failed. I couldn't tell until I look at the CPU. So let's go ahead and remove these 4 screws here, and we'll take a closer look and investigate together, because I haven't took this off yet. So let's go ahead and move forward to remove this from here. So I'm going to remove the pump, and you should now see, just pull this out here, it's getting caught up. There we go. Now that does look pretty dry. Now this was the compound that actually come pre-applied to the actual pump itself. And I'm wondering whether that's got pretty dry, because that looks pretty dry to me. And I'm wondering whether the temperature has been getting super hot here and it's dried out the compound or something, because that does look pretty dry. And it's looking pretty dry on the CPU as well. Now I can't see any burning on the CPU itself. There's no black marks or pitting or anything like that on here. And this does look okay. So the chip does look in good working order. That doesn't necessarily mean the chip hasn't failed or it's got a problem. The compound on here is hardly covered here, and this looks like it's had a thin smear, but it's actually pre-applied to the pump itself, and I normally apply a bit more than that, but that does look pretty dry to me, and I might need to reapply this when I get my new cooler. I'm going to get another cooler to test, and I will test that pump on another system. But let's go ahead and remove this and clean this all up. Just need to examine the motherboard pins to see whether the pins have any sort of damage or burnage to the actual socket itself, because that's a common problem with the 7000. Some people have said that they had some burning going on and it went right through to the chip and the board. So let's take a closer look together, and you can see here it looks okay. There's no issues, but it doesn't necessarily mean the board has not failed or the CPU has not failed. It just means that there is no burning on here. And normally with this issue that they're talking about is there's a big burn mark on here, and it's not. There's a perfectly clean socket here, so it looks fine. Doesn't mean the motherboard or the CPU is let go, but we'll check that at a later date. Now let's talk about that heat that I mentioned in the video. If you look at this case here, this case, these little holes are very, very small. It's not your normal mesh size. It's quite a tight little small mesh hole. And this gets super hot. And my radiator is up the back of this. And I'm wondering whether after some time, when I first turn it on, it's pretty cool. And what I do know is after being on for a while, it starts to get super hot and the whole panel gets hot. So I'm wondering whether there was an issue. Either there's not enough compound on the CPU is getting hot, it's making the liquid get hot, getting the pump nice and hot, and then also the radiator's getting hot and it's making the whole case hot. And if that's the case, pump could be bad, or the actual cooler could be getting starved of air and it's not getting enough air inside there. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this out, and we're going to replace it with an air cooler to test to see whether it's okay, whether there's any damage to the CPU or whether there's any damage to the motherboard. And once this is removed, we're replacing this complete unit with an air cooler, so we'll know now it's not the water-cooled system, and we can now bypass that and tick that off. So then we'll be down to the CPU or motherboard being the problem. So I've removed this out, and I'm not impressed with this case for airflow. It does seem a bit starved of air with this area here, with the radiator here, if I'm honest. And I didn't notice it before until I put my hand down the back there and realized it was quite warm. Now, we won't notice the temperatures because we did undervolt and we was capped at 70 Celsius. So we do know that the pump could have failed, or it could be just getting super hot where it's not getting enough air and cooling down the CPU and it's causing an issue. So hopefully the CPU and the motherboard are fine, and I'll know that when I replace it with an air cooler, because if it functions and works perfectly fine with an air cooler, then we know the all-in-one cooler was failed. And if there's still an issue, then we know it's either motherboard or CPU that's failed, and we can go ahead and change either one of those. You can either buy another motherboard and put that CPU in. It's very rare that CPUs let go, but they can actually fail. But other than that, I'm going to put the CPU back in here. I'm waiting for the cooler to be delivered, and once that's delivered, I'll give it a test. Unfortunately, it's not going to be today's video. I will end the video here, because I'm now confident that it's either going to be the water cooling system or it's going to be the motherboard or chip. And I will find that out today and replace whatever needs to be replaced. Anyway, with that said, I hope this has been some sort of use. My name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. Big shout out to my YouTube members. I appreciate the support, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.